The town of Greyhaven looked almost painted. A stretch of washed-out cottages, gulls circling low, and a sea that seemed too still for late October. Daniel Holt parked his car near the edge of the harbour and turned off the engine. For a moment, he sat there in silence, listening to the faint ticking of the cooling metal and the distant rhythm of waves against the dock. He hadn't been to the coast in years, not since the night everything had gone wrong. The salt in the air brought back the same faint nausea that had lingered after the crash, that sudden, weightless spin before the impact. He shook it off. This move was supposed to be a clean start, not a return to ghosts. Greyhaven was the kind of place that seemed permanently tired. The main street had one grocery, a cafe that closed at 6, and a row of rental cottages owned by a woman named Mara Ellison. She'd been the only one who responded to his ad request. Quiet tenant, long-term stay preferred. The way she'd said, "It's quiet here" on the phone had sounded less like a promise and more like a warning. Her property was at the very edge of the bay. A 2-story wooden house, paint stripped by the sea. Daniel carried his single duffel up the steps and noticed how the porch boards bent beneath his weight. The sea was only 50 meters away. It made the windows hum softly when the wind turned. When Mara arrived to hand him the keys, she was dressed in a fisherman's coat, her dark hair pulled back and flecked with salt. Her eyes were sharp but polite. "You'll hear the tide change before you see it," she said, passing him the ring of keys. "It's louder at night. Some people find it comforting." "I don't mind the noise," Daniel replied. His voice still carried that tone of someone used to apologizing for existing. She gave him a small nod. "It's month to month, cash or transfer. The last tenant left a few things behind. You can keep or toss them, doesn't matter." After she left, Daniel walked through the house. The floors creaked. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and something metallic like rust. In the living room stood an old oak table with 2 mismatched chairs and a single glass ashtray that hadn't been emptied. In the back, a narrow stairway led to the upper floor, where a single bedroom overlooked the ocean. That night, Daniel unpacked the essentials: clothes, a laptop, 2 books, and a worn photograph. The one thing he couldn't let go of. A younger version of himself stood beside a woman with red hair and a smile that had always felt too bright for him. She was gone now. Both of them were. The wind picked up as darkness set in. The walls made soft, irregular sounds, as though the house itself breathed. He sat by the window, watching the tide crawl toward the shore, slow and deliberate. In the reflection of the glass, he saw movement, a shadow on the beach, faint and human-shaped. He blinked. It was gone. Only the flicker of the porch light remained. The next morning he woke early and walked down to the harbour cafe. The woman behind the counter, mid-40s, blonde streaks in her hair, greeted him with the automatic warmth of someone who'd been there too long. "You're staying at Mara's place," she said before he even ordered. Daniel hesitated. "Yeah, just moved in." She nodded, her smile fading slightly. "That house has been empty a while. Before you, there was a man who stayed all winter. Fisherman. Nice enough, but left suddenly. Didn't even collect his things." "Any idea why?" "No," she said, wiping the counter. "But the sea takes a toll here. Everyone leaves, eventually." When Daniel returned to the house, Mara's truck was parked by the gate. She was unloading nets and crates. "You fish?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She gave a small shrug. "Used to. My brother did most of it before he disappeared." Daniel froze for just a second. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said quietly. "People go missing in places like this all the time. The tide erases things." That evening, Daniel sat on the porch, listening again to the sound of the sea. He couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. The tide erases things. It was a comforting idea, in a strange way. But when he glanced at the ashtray on the table again, he noticed something he hadn't before. A faint engraving along the edge, worn but readable under the right light. It was a name. E. Ellison. He stared at it, the wind hissing through the railing. Mara's last name was Ellison. Daniel spent the next few days pretending to settle in. He bought groceries, fixed a leaky window, walked the shoreline at dawn. From a distance, it looked like a man rebuilding his life. Up close, it was something quieter, a ritual of guilt disguised as routine. Every morning he passed Mara's house. She lived 2 cottages down, closer to the cliffs. Sometimes she was outside cleaning fish, sometimes repairing nets. She always greeted him the same way, a nod, a faint half-smile, a question lingering behind her eyes. It wasn't until the 5th day that he mentioned the name on the ashtray. "E. Ellison," he said casually as they stood near the pier. "Was that your brother?" Mara paused, tightening a rope around one of the posts. "Eli," she said finally. "Elliot Ellison. He used to rent that house before me. Before—" She stopped herself, then met Daniel's gaze. "Why?" He shrugged. "Just noticed the name. Didn't mean anything by it." Her expression didn't change, but something in her body went still. "He drowned," she said flatly. Or that's what they decided. The Coast Guard found his boat half a mile from the reef. No body, no evidence of anything really, just gone. "I'm sorry," Daniel murmured again, the words automatic. "People say the tide buries what it wants," she added, "but I think some people bury themselves." He didn't ask more, but that night he couldn't sleep. He sat by the upstairs window, watching the distant glimmer of buoys marking the edge of the reef. He remembered that night. The highway, the rain, the headlights that appeared out of nowhere. He'd swerved too late. The other car had gone over the guardrail, vanishing into the dark floodwater below. They'd called it an accident. He'd never been charged, but he knew what he'd done. The next day, he found himself at the Harbour Cafe again. The woman behind the counter, whose name he'd finally learned was Claire, eyed him carefully. "You look pale. Sea getting to you?" "Just not sleeping," he said. She poured his coffee. "That house does that to people. My husband used to do maintenance work for Mara, said the place creaks like it's alive. Maybe it's just old wood, or maybe—" She trailed off, then smiled. "Never mind. I'm getting superstitious." But later, walking back home, Daniel noticed something strange. The lock on the back door had been turned from the inside. He was sure he'd left it bolted. Nothing appeared missing, but one of the picture frames he'd brought, the photo of him and his wife, lay face down on the table. He picked it up, his pulse quickening. That evening, Mara knocked on his door. She stood holding a small tin box. "You dropped this?" she asked. He frowned. "No, I've never seen that before." She opened it. Inside were 3 items: a lighter, a ring with the initials EE, and a water-damaged photograph of 2 young people standing by a fishing boat. One of them was clearly Mara. The other, the man beside her, looked hauntingly familiar. Daniel's breath caught. The eyes, the jawline, the faint scar over the eyebrow. He knew that face. He'd seen it in the newspaper the week after the crash. Local fishermen missing after storm. Search suspended. Mara watched him. You sure you've never seen him before? Daniel forced himself to meet her gaze. No, should I have? She studied him for several seconds that felt like minutes. Then she smiled. Small, knowing. No reason, just wondered. When she left, Daniel shut the door and leaned against it, heart hammering. He sat down at the table, staring at the ashtray, the engraved name, the photograph. The sea roared faintly in the distance, like it was breathing against the walls. He couldn't shake the thought. Had she recognized him? That night, the wind turned violent. Rain pelted the windows. Waves crashed against the shore. Daniel tried to focus on reading, but every sound felt amplified. The groan of the beams, the rattle of the latch, the subtle vibration of something moving downstairs. He crept down with a flashlight. The back door stood open, wind whipping the curtains. Water streaked the floor. He stepped closer and noticed something just outside. A single wet footprint, bare, leading toward the dunes. He followed it only a few steps before it vanished into sand. The sea stretched ahead, black and endless. When he turned back toward the house, he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. Mara's truck was parked by the gate again, its lights off, engine silent. He waited, watching. No movement inside. Then, faintly, through the storm's noise, he heard a knock. It came from upstairs. He went cold. Slowly, flashlight trembling, he climbed the stairs. The knock came again, deliberate, rhythmic. It was coming from the inside of the bedroom wall. He stood frozen, every breath shallow. Then the noise stopped. When morning came, the sea was calm again. The world looked untouched, almost peaceful. But the inside of the wall where he'd heard the knocking was damp, darker than the surrounding wood, as if it had been recently exposed to water. Daniel pressed his hand against it. Cold. Too cold. The next afternoon, Mara came by again, bringing a bag of groceries. You looked half dead yesterday, she said. Thought you might need something decent to eat. Thanks, he said, wary but grateful. Rough night, the storm. She studied his face. You ever dream about the water? He hesitated. Sometimes. She nodded slowly. Me too. Before she left, she said something that lingered long after she was gone. The sea never keeps secrets, Daniel. It just waits for the right tide to bring them back. That evening, he tore open the damp section of the wall. Inside, he found nothing but insulation. And behind it, tucked between beams, a single folded piece of paper sealed in plastic. He unfolded it carefully. It was a police report. The heading read, Accident Report, Route 9 Coastal Highway. Below that, Victim, Elliot Ellison. And near the bottom, scrawled in faded ink, was a note that didn't belong there. You can run from the truth, but it will find the shore eventually. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat at the table with the police report spread before him. The handwriting burned into his mind. The storm outside had passed, but the air inside the house was heavy, saturated with salt and something older, like rot. He read the report again and again, though he already knew every word. It described the accident exactly as he remembered it. 2 vehicles, 1 overturned barrier, 1 body unrecovered. Weather conditions poor. No witnesses. He remembered the sound, the screech, the hollow thud, the silence after. He had stepped out into the rain, shaking, calling out into the blackness below. No answer. And then, the moment he chose to leave. Now, years later, That decision felt like an open wound. The sea refused to close. By morning, he was shaking from exhaustion. He decided to walk. The tide was low, revealing the scattered remnants of driftwood and debris along the sand. Mara was down by the pier, sorting nets again. He hesitated before approaching. When she saw him, she smiled, faintly but without warmth. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I found something," he said, holding the folded report. Her expression didn't change. "Where?" "In the wall. Upstairs." She took it, scanning it briefly. Her face gave nothing away, but her knuckles whitened around the edges of the paper. "That was my brother's file," she said quietly. "They closed his case after a week. Said he must have drifted out during the storm." "Why was it in my wall?" Daniel asked. "Because this was his house," she replied. "He lived here until the night he didn't come back." Daniel swallowed hard. "You said his boat was found near the reef." She nodded. "But no one saw him leave. I thought maybe he ran. People do when they can't live with what they've done." Her words hit him like the wind off the sea, sharp, cold, impossible to argue with. He should have told her then, should have said I was the driver. But the words refused to form. Guilt had a strange way of disguising itself as survival. Instead, he said he didn't deserve what happened. Mara's eyes flicked to his. "You talked like you knew him." He froze, every part of him tightening. "I didn't. Just meant no one does." She studied him for a long moment, then looked away toward the water. "You're right about that." That night, Daniel drank. Something he hadn't done in months. The whiskey burned, but dulled the noise inside his head. The sound of the sea grew louder, closer. He thought of his wife, the way she'd screamed his name as the car spun, the way her hand had slipped from his. She'd died on impact. He'd told the police it was just her in the car. No one had ever questioned it. He stumbled upstairs, sat on the floor near the broken section of wall. The scent of salt and wood filled the room. He whispered into the dark, "I didn't mean to kill him." A gust of wind rattled the window. The floorboards creaked. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard a faint tapping, the same slow, deliberate rhythm from before. He closed his eyes. "Please stop," he whispered. The next morning, he woke to sunlight cutting through the blinds and the faint sound of someone moving downstairs. He rose carefully and looked over the railing. Mara was in the kitchen, cleaning. "Door was open," she said without looking up. "You were out cold." He rubbed his face. "You shouldn't just... You talk in your sleep," she interrupted. Daniel froze. "What did I say?" She placed a mug of coffee on the table. "Enough." They sat across from each other, the silence like a held breath. Finally, Mara spoke. "You were there, weren't you? The night of the crash?" He didn't answer. "I thought so," she continued. "The police never found him because he never made it to the boat that night. He left the bar late, took the coastal road. They said the weather was bad." Her eyes locked onto his. "You were on that road." Daniel stared at the floor. His voice, when it came, was small. "I tried to help him. I swear I did. It was raining, and he came out of nowhere. I called, I looked, but there was nothing. Just water." Mara's expression didn't change. "And then you left." He nodded slowly. "I panicked. My wife she was dying. I thought I could save her." The silence stretched, heavy as the tide. Mara looked out the window, toward the endless grey horizon. "You know what's strange?" she said softly. "After the accident, I used to dream about him standing by the shore, not angry, just waiting, like he wanted someone to tell the truth." Daniel swallowed hard. "Then I'm telling you now." She turned to him, eyes glistening but dry. "You think that changes anything?" He didn't answer. Mara stood and walked to the door. "The sea doesn't forgive," she said. "It only returns what we've buried." She left without closing the door. That evening, Daniel went down to the water. The wind had calmed, the tide creeping in slow and deliberate. He waded in until the waves reached his knees, then his waist. The cold bit into him, sharp and alive. He whispered again, "I'm sorry." Somewhere beyond the horizon, the world felt like it might be listening. When he finally turned back, he saw Mara standing by the shore, watching him. She didn't move or speak. Only when he stepped out of the water did she turn away and walk back toward her house, leaving a single trail of footprints that the tide slowly erased. For the next few weeks, they lived like two ghosts, occupying the same stretch of coast. Mara still came by sometimes, leaving groceries at his porch, or pausing at the end of the path to say nothing at all. Daniel nodded, thanked her, tried to act normal. But something in her gaze had changed. The politeness had drained away. What remained was watchful, almost clinical. He began to notice small shifts in his surroundings. The ashtray on the table was moved one morning, turned slightly toward the window. The lighter inside the tin box, the one engraved with EE, appeared on the railing, though he hadn't touched it in days. Sometimes at night, the faint smell of smoke drifted through the hall, though he hadn't lit a cigarette since he'd moved in. It wasn't supernatural. It was human. Someone had been inside. One evening, he confronted her. The sky was bruised purple, the sea almost still. Mara was mending a net near the dock, her fingers deft and calm. "Have you been in my house?" he asked. She didn't look up. "You think I'm breaking in now?" "I know you took the report. I don't care about that. But if you're trying to what, Daniel?" she said, cutting him off. Her voice was quiet, but sharp enough to draw blood. "You think you're the only one who lost someone that night?" He took a step closer. "I told you what happened." "No," she said, looking up finally. "You told me what you remember. There's a difference." Her tone carried something deeper than anger, resignation, as if she'd already made peace with a truth he hadn't yet seen. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Mara's expression softened for the first time in days. "Nothing," she said. "I just wanted to know if you'd say it out loud." "I did." "Then maybe you should start asking why you survived." She gathered her nets and walked away, leaving him standing there as the tide rolled in, erasing her footprints one by one. That night, Daniel dreamed again of the road, the crash, the sound of metal collapsing like a lung. But in the dream, when he stepped out into the rain to look over the guardrail, he saw not darkness, but water reflecting his own headlights. And standing knee-deep in that reflection was a man with Mara's eyes. When he woke, he was shivering. The window had blown open again. The sea outside glowed faintly with dawn light. He went downstairs and found the front door ajar. On the table sat the tin box. Inside, the ring and lighter were gone. In their place was a folded note. "Meet me by the reef before sunset." The handwriting was Mara's. He almost didn't go. But curiosity, guilt, maybe both, drove him there. The reef jutted from the water like a rib cage, half submerged at low tide. Mara was waiting near the rocks, her hair loose, coat whipping in the wind. "You came," she said simply. "I wasn't sure if I should." "You should," she replied. "It's time you saw where it happened." Daniel's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" She pointed toward the water. "That night, the storm. You said you called out, but no one answered." He nodded slowly. "I think you didn't hear him because he never drowned." For a moment he couldn't speak. "What?" "The Coast Guard searched the wrong area," she said. "They found the boat empty, but the currents here can carry a man south for miles. A body could wash up days later, or not at all. I used to come here every day, hoping something would surface. But nothing did." Daniel stared at her. "You're saying he's alive?" She looked at him then, eyes glinting. "I don't know. But sometimes I think he wanted you to believe he was dead." He laughed bitterly. "Why would he do that?" "So you'd live with it." The words hit him harder than any accusation. He turned away, looking toward the dark line of horizon. "You don't know what it's like to carry this." "I do," she said. "Because every day I wake up wishing he'd been the one to survive instead." They stood in silence, waves lapping around their ankles. The tide was rising fast. Finally, she said, "If you want to leave, you should, before the storm comes back." He shook his head. "I can't leave." "Not again." Mara studied him a moment longer, then stepped closer. "Then maybe the sea will decide for you." And with that, she turned and walked back toward the cliffs, leaving him standing alone as the first drops of rain began to fall. By the time he returned to the house, the storm had broken. Wind howled through the cracks. The floorboards trembled. He shut every window, every door, but the noise of the sea pressed against the walls like something alive. In the flicker of lightning, he saw the photo on the table again, the one of him and his wife, but now it was different. Water had warped the image, bleeding the colors until her face was almost gone. Only his own remained, distorted by the reflection of the glass. He whispered to the empty room, "What do you want from me?" The only answer was the sound of the tide, relentless, patient, pulling at the shore like breath. He realized then that the sea didn't want anything. It simply waited. The next morning, Mara's truck was gone. Her house stood empty, door unlocked, nets left to dry. Daniel asked around town, but no one had seen her leave. The harbor cafe was closed. The streets were quiet. By nightfall, the wind shifted again, carrying the smell of rain. He sat on the porch, watching the horizon disappear behind mist. A fishing boat bobbed far out near the reef, a faint silhouette against the grey. He thought of Mara's last words, "Maybe the sea will decide for you." And for the first time, he wondered if she had meant herself. Days passed. Greyhaven felt emptier than ever. Daniel stayed mostly inside, the wind whipping through cracks, the waves crashing like a distant drum. The town moved on around him. Fishermen repaired nets, gulls cried above the harbor, the cafe reopened with its automatic greetings. But Daniel remained suspended, trapped between the past and the indifferent present. He kept checking the horizon, hoping for a sign, a boat, a figure, anything. But there was only mist, sea, and the slow rise and fall of the tide. Mara's absence left a hollow space he could neither fill nor leave behind. One morning, he wandered down the beach, boots sinking into wet sand. The tide had left traces of debris, driftwood, seaweed, plastic fragments of unknown origin, and there, almost buried under a mound of kelp, was a small, wet envelope. His name was scrawled across it in Mara's handwriting. He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single photograph. Mara, standing on the cliffs, looking down at the waves, her expression unreadable. On the back, in the same handwriting, "Some tides never return what is lost. Some truths are better left at sea." Daniel folded the photograph slowly. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying the scent of salt and storm. He realized then that some part of her had always been part of the tide, untouchable, untraceable, just as Elliot had been. In the following days, Daniel tried to resume life. He walked the shore, repaired the small damages in the house, read books, and occasionally spoke to the townsfolk. But he spoke less than he listened. The sound of the sea was always there, a reminder that the past was present and that some answers would never surface. He never saw Mara again. Her house remained empty, nets still draped over the porch rails, curtains fluttering in the wind. Sometimes he thought he caught her silhouette in the distance, a figure walking the cliffs at dawn, disappearing before he could reach her. Daniel understood something vital then. The sea was not cruel. It was indifferent. It did not judge. It did not forgive. It only held what was given to it and returned pieces when it chose. Sometimes, late at night, he would stare at the ashtray engraved with Elliot's initials or the small tin box left behind. Sometimes he would whisper apologies into the dark, hoping they might float out to the horizon. And sometimes, when the tide was just right, he thought he saw footprints leading into the surf. Not his, not hers. Someone else's, fleeting, human-shaped, disappearing as if they had never existed at all. He never asked the questions that would ruin the fragile piece he had carved from guilt and regret. The accident, Mara's brother, Mara herself, all unresolved, all intertwined, all part of a story the sea had absorbed long before he arrived. Daniel stayed in Greyhaven for months. He never left the coast entirely, though he considered it every day. The town became a kind of purgatory, neither punishment nor sanctuary, just a place where he could exist alongside the tide, the sound of which was now both a torment and a companion. He never forgot the crash, the rain, the moment the world had tilted and sent him spinning out of control. He never forgot Elliot, though he did not know whether Mara's brother was alive or lost to the sea forever. The waves carried the truth, slowly, patiently away from him. And he learned to live with that, not forgiven, not absolved, not reconciled, simply alive in a world where the tide decides which secrets return and which vanish forever.